Now, the World Bank estimates that 95% of Kenya's businesses and entrepreneurs operate within the informal sector. Now, as the country grapples with the COVID-19 pandemic, the sector is vulnerable, and enterprise finance and innovation specialist Duncan Oyaru shared his thoughts on how best it can be protected.
I'd like to look at, the way the informal sector is being affected through three prisms. So the first would be, how are they able to manage their day-to-day obligations? During this period, sales have pretty much dropped, and that means that their cash flows for informal enterprises have been interrupted. The same goes for informal workers who have lost their jobs, which are temporary in nature. So the biggest impediment for helping them to manage their day-to-day is the fact that they no longer have a constant stream of cash flows. So for the informal workers, it's much more dire, because that actually means that they're not able to put food on the table, as well as for the smaller informal enterprises who rely on their daily sales to actually earn a living. Another way I'd like to look at it is, their capability to mitigate whatever risks they face. And we have to recognize that this pandemic is actually a macroeconomic risk that has actualized. So most informal people, or the informal sector, relies on informal risk mitigation strategies that at this time cannot hold water, as the impact of this pandemic is at scale. So that means their support mechanism during these times are not able to. Then I'd like to look at it in terms of their future, how it will affect their future. It pretty much means that the informal sector has to put on pause whatever plans they had for the future, and focus on addressing, whatever issues they're plaguing them right now. So that means tapping into their savings, pretty much doing everything that they can do to stay afloat. Now, when you talk about what risk mitigation measures are available to them, I think the first and most important thing for the informal sector at this point is pretty much staying afloat. People have to be creative. Enterprises have been shown to sort of try to do new things. I've seen cases whereby small-scale traders now starting to sell things like face masks and that sort of thing. Informal traders selling sanitizers and other sanitary ware. So in the short term, it's pretty much trying to stay afloat, looking for new opportunities. But in all of this, we also see that the government has a role to play, pretty much in ensuring that these enterprises remain afloat.
Only 25%, according to the World Bank, of informal businesses own a business account. How is this going to affect finance, especially in this time?
Well, it's important for me to point out that by the very nature of informal enterprises and workers not being able to access formal finance, they have developed coping mechanisms or alternative ways of financing. Now, FSD kind of conducted a financial diaries research, and which shows us that this informal sector, they might actually use up to 20 formal and informal financial instruments just to get by every month. Now, my hunch is that at this point, this financial juggling will be quite elaborate, just for the informal sector to try and get through. But if we are looking at the formal finance, which is already limited, we can expect that to contract further. But our central bank has made a raft of measures just to try and ensure that finance keeps flowing now. Some of these measures include the central bank has directed banks to make it possible for distressed borrowers to restructure their loans over a 1-year period. It has also reduced the central bank rates, the base lending rate, from 8.25% to 7.25%. It has also eased up liquidity requirements for banks. The cash reserve ratio is down from 5.25% to 4.25%. And it has also released 35.2 billion shillings just to give banks additional liquidity, just to support borrowers that are distressed.
Right. Just quickly before I let you go, are there any innovations that you think would offer some solutions to the current economic shocks? I know that you've mentioned some of the measures that have been taken, but what innovations do you think could be adapted at this time?
Well, I think you have to look at innovations in terms of how can the informal sector innovate to cope with this time. And I think that at this point, it's very difficult because immediately the key priority is to survive, right? But if we are to get out of this, then I think the informal sector has an opportunity to explore new ways of doing business. And here I'm talking about new business models offered by digital platforms. We're talking about informal workers tapping into the gig economy, where they're able to offer their services directly to the market, which has been done in other markets, in our local markets to a lesser extent, and that is due to several constraints that need to be addressed. Here we are talking about low smartphone penetrations, varied literacy levels, inadequate infrastructure to support a digital economy, and pretty much the fact that informal sector tends to be quite opaque, and informal players don't want all this visibility. But if these are to be overcome, I think that we could come out stronger out of this crisis. We'd have an informal sector that is looking for new ways to do business.